pretty much give you my introduction to how I first learned about you and your respective background, because it really wasn't until I came across your episode that you had done with the Corridor Crew guys, where you talked about the various films you've worked on, among other things as well too, the choreography with swords and the work you've done with Jesse on his films as well. And that's really where I became more aware of you as far as your stunt and fight coordination is concerned with your career. And then after the fact, then I started taking more notice of you, of the things you have done with Jesse, which then in turn, as just kind of by chance, you started to get more prominent roles in his films, Hell Hath No Fear being one of them, and of course, White Elephant, as I mentioned before, in a previous review I've done. So when I had learned more about you as far as what you have done, and again, I've come to figure out that along the way, you've been pretty much involved with almost in some way, shape, or form with various projects out there that in a lot of ways were more or less landmark films that I had no idea you were part of, and that you were in some way, shape, or form in those respective projects. You know, Karate Kid being the first one here. I think for anyone who may not know that, but it really wasn't until when I heard your second conversation you had with the guys in Corridor Crew, where I started actually getting more knowledge about your background, about how, because like the one thing I always try to take into consideration is about what's something I don't know at all about, and what I can actually learn from what the person has delved into about the respective field of work. In this case, you're an expert with knives and swords, and there was something. It's going to sound pretty mundane, maybe to most people's ears, but for me personally, it was one of those situations where because of the way you explained it, it made me realize how much knowledge you had to understand the importance of not just the safety side of it, as far as swords and knives are concerned, but understand the effects that it has in a real life scenario, where you talked about if someone gets stabbed, you don't want to be the person to pull out the knife because it can have some serious consequences. It's not like how it works in the movie. So little tidbits like that, I always had learned the most from, because that's where I thought you had shared the most insightful information, apart from just the history of the swords and whatever the case may be. But then when I started listening to you talk more about some more of the other films you've worked on as well too, one in particular was with regards to Savage Dog, which is where that's really the film that made me aware of Jesse Johnson as a director and also as a writer as well too. And I understand you've had a pretty long history with him even before then. But what I want to really more or less kind of start off with you is because you actually are in a unique position for myself, where I've been able to talk to directors, and they always have an insight about the various people they work with, and have some knowledge, maybe not to the extent of someone as yourself, but they have some insight about how the overall engine works in some way or shape or form, to get an understanding about who to bring in for whatever is required for the upcoming project they're going to be working on here. So when I came across the amount of work you've done with Jesse, among other things as well too, the one thing that I thought was really interesting that I wanted to point out with you is that, Scott is someone you've worked with before on more than one occasion, but there's something that he points out every single time, and I agree with him 100%, and I'm sure you may be in the same boat as him, is where when it comes to the preparation for a fight sequence, whether it be, actual combat scene, sword fighting, whatever the case may be, but the amount of work that goes into that. And one of the things that he's pointed out was where, and I remember I'm using Batman Begins as an example, because this is one of the first times where I actually took notice of that, even at that time, where the fight sequences in that movie I wasn't a fan of. But then when I saw the behind the scenes of what they had choreographed for those respective fight scenes, none of that stuff ever made it to the film, which blew my mind away as far as why they hired these guys, but never actually show the final, all the work that they put into it in the final film. Then, of course, Scott has brought up about how he understands that the short schedule he has, which Avengers, one of the major films he pointed out, where you had mentioned it before, that you had 2 days for that final sequence in the film, where the producers on the set had only wanted to give him 1 day, and then Scott had to pretty much put up a fight and eventually got what he needed for the second day to be able to get everything you guys need for that sequence, which ended up being one of the more highlighted points of the movie, which I know you were also part of as well too. But this is kind of a elongated question, but what I'm trying to lead to with this here is because this is something that I think a lot of people don't really understand, because I think when people look at an action film, and the first thing I always point out is, what do you like about the action sequence, or what about the films you like? And they always point out the action sequence. And when I check out the movies, I won't say all the films that I've come across, but there's quite a few films that have some of the worst choreography or some of the worst editing, or maybe a great choreography, but the editing is, is horrible, or vice versa. And then you get someone who is really good at their job, and you hired them, but yet I don't understand how much power the fight choreographer or the stunt coordinator really actually have to be able to have an input in the matter. Say, hey, if you want us to put this together, you've got to give us the opportunity to be able to showcase it in the film in the final edit. Because if you are going to shoot it like X, Y, and Z, where you're just working all different angles, but not worry about how to actually choreograph the fight scenes the way that we shot it for the previs, then why hire us in the first place? Because it seems like to me that a lot of stunt coordinators don't really get the recognition for what they do, because the work is overlooked because of the way it's put together at the end of the day. But there are some people out there such as yourself, and even to some extent Scott and various other people as well, including the guys in 8711, who have garnered a notorious resume where they have been able to showcase their work, and their films as a result have become very successful, considering the amount of work they put into the preparation, which shows in the final work, which I'm hoping that is going to be a consistent trend moving forward here. So again, I do apologize for the elongated question, but that's kind of my starting off with you, because I'm curious to see how you feel if the industry is more leaning towards the stunt coordinators, the fight choreographers, to really do their jobs, to show what they've been putting together, to have that showcase in the final product at the end of the day. Because I'm starting to see a little bit of that. I'm still kind of skeptical that it's still a long way before we get to that point where the studio and the producers are trusting to let these guys do their job, to really have us to see a really well choreographed stunt sequence, or whatever the case may be. So I'm curious to hear about your perspective on it now, considering how things have changed from when you first started and how things are going for you now in your perspective here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks. Big question, but I've got answers for it. In the last 2 decades, a lot of things have changed in the film industry in terms of when it comes to action. I really feel like there were a handful of people that brought the change in action to the forefront of starting to get producers and production companies to understand a different way of doing action and understanding the merits of blending different styles. When I was beginning, when I came to LA and I started working in films, I was fortunate enough to literally push my way into getting a chance to work with Koichi Sakamoto and Alpha Stunts. And Koichi Sakamoto was the action director and fight choreographer for Guyver Dark Hero and the Power Rangers TV series. Right. And he also did a number of films afterwards. He was one of the stunt coordinators on Mimic, and a number of other films. You know, we did oh God, what is the name of the movie? I'm trying to remember. A number of other films after that, in between, when we were doing other projects. But when we did Drive with Mark Dacascos and Kadeem Artisan, we were able to showcase a blend of Hong Kong style cinema and American filmmaking before everyone else in Hollywood had done it. Because a year later, Jackie came out with Rush Hour and a bunch of other films that really pushed the issue of saying, look, here's Hong Kong style action filmed in an American Hollywood action movie, and we're showing you that you can blend the two and make it work. So that when we did Drive, in my opinion, and a lot of other people within the industry know this, Drive was ahead of its time in terms of being one of the first films before anyone else to showcase Hong Kong style action in a Hollywood film, in a Hollywood action film. And ever since then, that trend has, been pushing the envelope. The 8711 guys, absolutely. Chad, David, all the guys at 8711 have carved out their own niche in terms of they are now at the forefront, because Chad Stahelski has gone into being a director now and has proven himself above and beyond. And so is Dave Leitch, in terms of saying, look, I know I was a stunt coordinator, I'm a second year director, but you're going to take me seriously as a director in terms of my creative ability to make an entire film as a director, but also bring top-notch, cutting-edge action into a film and be able to do it as the director and not just the second year director or the stunt coordinator. And so that trend, we're in the middle of it now. And I find it's opening new doors into making producers and production companies understand to allow stunt coordinators, fight choreographers, and second year directors, allow them to use their knowledge to do their job, to really showcase the kind of action that's possible when you let us do our job. And that goes from previs all the way through to the finished product in the movie. One person that was absolutely instrumental in doing this better than anyone was the late Brad Allen.
Yeah, I know he is.
Was probably the best person at starting from a previs, explaining his previs, making the previs such a good final product that it was very visually clear to the producers and everyone else involved. We've got to let this guy do his job. So there are numbers of videos up on YouTube that show a comparison between Brad's previs and the finished product in the movie. They did it with Kick-Ass and a couple of his other films where it shows it's identical. And that all of the hard work that Brad put in all got showcased in the final edit of the action scene in the movie. So the proof was in the pudding in terms of people watched it and went, this guy really knows what he's doing, and we allowed him to do it, and here's our finished product, and here's the proof because here's his previs, and here's the final edit of the movie when it was released. So a lot of different groups, a lot of different stunt coordinators, a lot of different individual people are now working and pushing hard to continue to show the ability of action professionals to be able to deliver onto a film and to producers the kind of action that they've been talking about all along. And so Sam Hargrave is another person in terms of a director and an action director who, you know, had the ability to try and push the envelope, as well as his brother and their whole team. There have been a number of people that have been able to push forward. Scott Adkins, as an action star, was kind of at the head of this because of Scott's physical abilities, because Scott, in my opinion, and I'm just going to put this out there, Scott's the most talented action performer in film.
I agree.
Tom Cruise is a genius in terms of production, wanting to bring a level of action to movies and giving a very daring final product in Tom's movies. But in all honesty, no one moves like Scott. Scott literally is the reincarnation of Jackie Chan in our age. And I will put Scott up against everyone in the film industry in terms of what he's physically capable of doing in a fight scene to make everything work. He's got more injuries. His injuries are kind of getting up there with Jackie's because Scott is so dedicated to a final product. And when you see Scott's movies, and then we all say the same thing, everybody looks at it and goes, what the hell is the matter with Hollywood? Why aren't they giving this guy a chance? And what it boils down to is pencil pushing numbers. Accountants and producers are all going off of executive numbers now. They're not looking at creativity. They're not looking at what's right in front of them. So they take Scott's numbers in terms of the amount of money that his movies make, his budgets, and everything else. And instead of looking at the individual accomplishment, they do pencil pushing and they look at numbers and they go, well, this guy's not commercially viable. He's not somebody that I'm going to take a risk of and put in a big movie. So they all lose. They all lose. You know, Scott's coming up in John Wick 4.
Yeah.
And I know some inside scoop stuff that I'm absolutely not allowed to say or talk about, but I'm really hoping that Chad kind of needles Hollywood and gives Scott a chance to shock people. It's Keanu Reeves' film. It's Chad's movie, but Chad, you know, brought people onto that film on purpose because Chad knows what he's doing. And I'm really hoping that, you know, Scott and a lot of other people in the industry get the chance to break out and really get the budgets and the facilities to do what it is they're capable of doing. Because we're all trying to do the same thing. I and don't allow that to affect me. I've been G. Johnson's fight choreographer and stunt coordinator for over 20 years.
Right.
And I've done almost all of his pictures. And every time I take on a job, I know it's going to be an uphill battle. But, you know, our mantra is it's all about quality. We never, ever allow a budget to limit what we want to do creatively. So for the most part, we tend to get decent budgets, but we always take what we're given and make sure that the final product in terms of the finished movie looks like a lot more than what we were given to work with. And a lot of that is because of our collaboration with Scott. Scott makes it a lot easier.
I was going to ask you about that because here's what I don't mean to interrupt you but there's a reason why I wanted to interject something here, because one of the things that I think I've noticed with a lot of people ever since I think like a lot of people who became more aware of Scott was obviously through his work in Undisputed 2. And then from there, you know, the various work he's done along the way. But it really wasn't until, I think, in my opinion, when he worked with Jesse on Savage Dog. I know he worked with him before for a small little part in Pit Fighter, but it really wasn't until Savage Dog where I think Jesse brought the best out of Scott in terms of, you know, the acting, in terms of the story that required that kind of acting that his character, the character he played in this movie. Of course, the action sequences were one thing that definitely did help out with the film, but it was more, I think, where I think more people took notice of him as an actor, more so as than as an action star, if you will. But the reason I'm pointing it out is because I'm wondering if, you know, because you've had a pretty storied career in terms of like the amount of people that you've worked with here before in the past, but I'm wondering if that particular film for you personally had changed in terms of like how people look at you as maybe as a fight choreographer, as a stunt coordinator, that you know, considering how well received the movie was. I think the film did very well as well too, as a result of him doing some Jesse working on Scott's upcoming projects, well, to Triple Threat of Avengement, of course, Accident Man, just to name a few. But I'm wondering if that movie had in some way helped your career in terms of like how people looked at you as a stunt coordinator and a fight choreographer because of how well the film had turned out and how well it was received, considering all the pieces that were put together there. So I'm wondering if you have noticed anything that may have changed, or maybe it was exactly the same and it was just another day in the office for you, and then the next gig that came up, it was just another gig at that point.
No, it's a very a very astute observation of yours, because you're absolutely right. Savage Dog was a special project, and it absolutely was a turning point. Working with Jesse and working with Scott when the film was put together, and I spoke with Jesse, and it was decided that I was going to be the stunt coordinator and the fight choreographer. I took the challenge on 300%. And I had met and known of Scott years ago when Scott went to go and do the film Special Forces with Isaac Florentine. Scott was very young then. And we had all gone out. I'd gone out to sushi with all of them because I was working with Alpha Stunts at the time. I was a member of the team. And we all went out to dinner with Isaac and Scott. And Scott was getting ready to go off with Isaac and do Special Forces. I had known that Scott was at that time, talented stuntman. And I'd seen some of the things he'd done, and I knew that, he was super physically talented. And I remember talking and chatting with him at dinner, and, he was super enthusiastic. And I just, remember looking at him and going, Scott's going to blow up, which he did. But when we did Savage Dog, Scott really hadn't remembered that. And so, in all honesty, and in all fairness to Scott, Scott was like, well, I've never worked with LaFontaine. So, hang on a second. I'm very protective of what my style is. And I'd like to see something. And so I made a short previs for one of the fights and choreographed it and shot it as a full previs with all of the angles and shot it as a finished product. And I did that with another stuntman by the name of Greg Fitzpatrick, who's super, super talented stunt guy.
He is. Yeah.
And we put this thing together, and I submitted it to Scott, and Scott watched it, and he liked it. And he contacted back and said, I like what you did. I like it. Okay. And, we went out to sort of a late brunch, and we met, and Scott kind of looked at me and went, oh, wait a minute. You were in the previs. And I went, yep, I played the bad guy. I said, I was the guy who was supposed to be fighting you in the previs. And he goes, oh, okay. And we talked, and, we slowly started, hitting it off. And we both had the right idea in terms of, we agreed on what the style was going to be for the movie, and that this film was going to take more of a dramatic turn, and that this character was not Boyka, and this character wasn't any of Scott's other characters. He was somebody that was supposed to be a lot more realistic character in 1959 in Indochina. And as somebody that was an expat Irishman who was on the run, having been in Southeast Asia, his character might have picked up a number of different fighting techniques, but he wouldn't have known modern Taekwondo. He wouldn't have known modern techniques. So we had to, I purposely took a very cerebral approach in terms of cross-referencing martial arts. I did a lot of research into 19th century and 20th century dirty boxing and street fighting and gypsy traveler bare knuckle fights, as well as looking at Muay Thai and other Southeast Asian martial arts that would have been around at the time, and combined that to come up with choreography for Scott that would have made sense for his character. And Scott liked the choreo, and I let him know. I said, well, I'm going for something different here. And it all seemed to come together and pay off. We worked really, really hard on the fights. We didn't have tons of time to shoot it.
Right.
But again, when you have Scott just makes things work. So you're never sitting with things where you're doing 12 takes of something, unless it's a super complicated camera angle.
Right.
Scott's going to get it in a couple of takes. And so when we did Savage Dog, there were a number of things that were challenges. The schedule was a huge challenge because we didn't have a lot of time.
Right.
And so I had to, on top of the schedule, I had to try and get people that I knew were going to be okay fighting Scott. I said, I've got to get guys that I know can hang with Scott. They've got to be able to do choreography with him. I can't just bring in anybody. And so I rounded up a lot of stunt professionals that were friends of mine that I knew who did fights. People like Esteban Cueto, Dennis Kiefer, David William No. A lot of people that when it came time to do these fights, they were going to be able to keep up with Scott's sense of timing, rhythm, and speed. Scott's lightning fast.
Yeah.
And he's really deadly serious during his fight scenes. So I had to make sure that it really all blended together in sort of a perfect storm where when it came to Savage Dog, all the way through the film, we were able to stick to the mantra of a sense of realism and a weight and a character that no one had seen Scott play before. And Jesse was fantastic about having meetings and discussions with Scott about the character and about the performance and about acting. And that started the relationship between the two of them, where there was a total symbiosis in terms of Scott and Jesse got along in terms of the push and pull about performance and seeing a new level. Not that it wasn't always there, but seeing a new level to Scott's performance and Scott's characters and what he was doing, where we had a pleasant surprise to be able to show people, hey, look, we all love Scott, but you guys have got him wrong. Scott's an actor. Scott can perform. Scott can do a lot more than you think. So, yeah, I know you love seeing him throw a 720 or a 540, but that's not enough. And we want to shock you with depth. We want to shock you with drama. We want to make this guy rooted and vulnerable and real and throw the action in with that. And purposefully, I tried to make the action a lot more grounded, a lot more real, a lot more violent. And that trend continued as Scott and I did more pictures together, because the characters in the movies that we worked on together were much more realistic characters. They weren't superhuman. They weren't God level martial artists the way they were written. So Savage Dog was kind of the stepping stone that set everything off. And you're absolutely right in your observations in that was a very, very special project for me. I literally, my phone, the screensaver on the front of my phone is the Savage Dog film poster because it was very special to me, because that was the beginning of my relationship with Scott. And Scott trusted me to work with him and for us to deliver something that people would see as different. And I think that Savage Dog was a real success in that way, because all of the things that we tried to portray and bring across came across and people loved the movie.
Well, so here's something that I wanted you to delve into, because I actually talked to Jesse about this, I think, over 2 years ago now, because there was a story that I heard. He clarified what had happened here. And so I'm hoping you can kind of give your perspective on this here, because I think the initial story that, if I remember correctly, that I heard was that it was something along the lines where Scott was not happy with the film, and that I think at the time he had said that it was possibly one of his worst movies he's ever done. And then he told he was never going to work with Jesse again. Then Jesse clarified, I think, the remarks he had made at the time, which was that Scott was actually not happy with the fight sequence, because the way, I guess, it was edited at the time didn't turn out so well, but he was actually happy with his performance. Then once he became heavily involved with the editing for the fight sequences, then he realized, okay, we do have a good project along the way where all the pieces came together and with what we got in the final product. The reason I'm bringing this up here is because, there was, I understand that, every production has, hurdles to overcome, but what I was curious about from hearing from your perspective in that particular instance where Jesse and Scott maybe had some disagreements, especially when it came to the editing, if at any point, if you felt like, even though you guys had a pretty good turnout in terms of developing the relationship and what you guys had worked on and were happy with how it came out as far as the shoots was concerned, but then coming and hearing maybe the word after the fact where Scott wasn't happy with the edit of the film, if you had any concerns that maybe wasn't as good as we thought it was while we were shooting it, and then, or if you were a part of that process, did you have some concerns? Did you share the same concerns that Scott did, or were you kind of more or less in the middle, like, Scott knows what he's doing. I'm gonna let he's gonna figure out what's gonna work as he puts the film together as far as the fight sequences are concerned, because it sounds like to me from that point on that's where him and Jesse kind of have more or less that unwritten rule that whenever Scott is working on a project with Jesse, he's going to work on all the action and he'll be responsible for that when it came to the final edit of the film in that respect. So I'm curious to hear about your perspective from here and from that inception, and how everything's turned out now.
Right. Well, I can tell you unequivocally that I can tell you exactly Exactly. Not roughly. I can tell you exactly what happened during that entire sequence.
Okay.
We finished the film. Um, the the fights needed to be edited.
Hmm.
They had been roughly edited already by the editor. I went in, I was asked to go in. I went in and I took a look at them, and a bunch of things had to be changed. I looked at it and I went, okay, no, this isn't right. And so I had to recut the action. Now I was on a time frame deadline. I didn't have a lot of time at all. I had like one day to do all the fights.
Hmm.
And we did it. And we forwarded that to Scott. Now, Scott is the first one that'll admit to you that he is incredibly protective
Right.
of his image, what his fights look like, and rightfully so.
Right.
Now, does Scott go a little overboard? Yes, he does. Scott and I are friends. I'll publicly put that out there. It's entirely understandable, but he
Right.
can initially overreact. And that's what happened. You got this call back and fucking hell, and this is shit. And I kind of went, whoa, 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 whoa. Now, at the time, I was getting ready to leave on a John Woo film. I had already had my flight booked. I was leaving to Japan. It was a real time crunch, and I had to message Scott and I had to talk to Jesse, and we went, okay, look, this is our first film together, and I had to say, Scott, that's a rough assembly. That's not the final edit. Of course, I know that you're going to want changes, and I'm not trying to put this forth as, hey, this is your fight scene. I'm like, look, this is a rough assembly. I put it together. Obviously, you're going to, it was all edited correctly in terms of sequence and everything, but there were stylistic things that Scott wanted to change, and he did. Now, Scott's a very, very good editor.
Yeah, I agree.
And now, almost all the time, Scott edits his own fight scenes, and he should, because he's incredible at it, and he's really good at it. And what had happened was it all kind of got calmed down, but we got into bad time crunches on certain fights, and there was nothing that could be done about it. I think, I'll be blunt honest. The fight scene between Kong Lee and Scott, I wound up with 1 hour and 45 minutes to shoot that entire fight.
Hmm.
So you want to talk about the pressure being on, we got it done. And I shot it. And Scott was gracious enough, even growling at me, to be like, you better know what you're doing here. And I knew. I said, we're just following the previs. I got it. We're fine. And it all went fine. And we got everything. And we got, Scott getting kicked and wrecking over the desk and all that stuff. And then, it was decided, hey, this fight scene's too short. And I'm like, really? Duh. Of course it's too short. You gave me 1 hour and 45 minutes to shoot the whole damn fight. What did you think was going to happen? So nobody was arguing there, but I had to go off to Japan to work on this John Woo picture. So we got people together. I stayed in communication as much as I could. A couple more guys were hired. 2 sequences had extra footage shot to make the fight scene longer. And Scott was there, and Scott had input, and Scott did it. And I believe that Marco Zaror actually came in to help. And, I have nothing but respect for those guys. So I was like, I'm fine with that. And pieces were added on. And then so with that being done, and then Scott going through the final edit, everybody was happy. Scott was happy. Jesse was happy. I was happy. It all worked out great. And at the time, Scott, in some ways, this was a new thing for him. So in some ways, I feel like Scott was kind of going, this is a completely new, different kind of film for me. I don't really know how to feel about this because it wasn't an easy shoot. The shoot itself was very difficult. We were pushing, and the time frame was insane. We were trying to accomplish something that we had a lot less than what we needed, and it was through everybody working extra hours and me literally going through more and more rehearsals. And there were moments where, and Scott is famous for this, and Scott will admit to this, Scott will always make fights longer to an extent where he's rivaling a lot of the Hong Kong guys in terms of, we had a fight and the fight was almost 4 minutes long. And Scott looked at me and went, make it longer. And I kind of looked at him like, what? He goes, make it longer. I'm like, all right, boss, no problem, Scott. Fine. I went away and choreographed 2 whole more sections and put them in the fight. And I literally choreographed those 2 sections in like an hour and came back and go, all right, pal, here it is. And, he's kind of looking at me all kind of squinty eyed. And then we went through it and he goes, right, fine, I like it. So it made the fight a lot longer. It all blended together. So the result of what you see in the finished film is a culmination of everything. It's a culmination of Scott pushing because Scott wants what he wants in terms of representation of himself. My absolutely wanting to work with him and give him what he wanted, because there was in no way on my watch that Scott was going to be like, oh, this is subpar, or I don't feel like I'm getting what I want, or anything else. I made sure that I was pushing 200% in terms of going, you want choreography? Here it is. And Jesse also being right there with us in terms of, wanting to make sure that the overall feel of the fight was a certain way, and that, it had still had a vicious edge to it and had a real edge. And in a lot of cases, I was stuck in the middle where, Jesse was going, I want more. And Scott was going, I want more. And I'm going, guys, we've got like 1 day to shoot these 2 entire sequences. And I'm giving you everything you want, but we know what our budget is. We don't have $25 million to do this. And there's got to be a sense of realism in terms of, I'm going to push, and we're going to extend, and we're going to do as much as we can. But at the same time, let's keep a sense of reality in terms of what we can get done in a 14-hour day. And we absolutely pushed the envelope, and everybody was pushing. Jesse was pushing on me. Scott was pushing on everybody. Scott was pushing on me. I was saying, okay. I'm not going to say that there wasn't like barking and yelling on set. During the final sequence, during the final fight between Marco and Scott, I had a bit of a tizzy and kind of flipped out for 22 seconds because we were arguing about a camera angle where I knew I was right. And all of a sudden there was we should do that. And I just kind of flipped out and cussed like a sailor. And I went, this is the camera angle, just like I said it was in the beginning. You've now all come back to this, but you wasted 15 minutes talking about it. And Scott just went, okay, all right, mate, we're fine. You're right. We're going to do it. And it turned out fine. But when you're trying to do things on that level, so the bottom line was, through all of the moments of drama, it all got worked out. And there were very funny moments when literally years later, I literally think that like Scott and I were either working on Debt Collector or Debt Collectors. And we were alone and we were in between fight rehearsals, and Scott kind of just sat there and went, wow, I guess people really like this movie. And I had to kind of bark and go, yeah, Scott, it's a fucking great film. You're awesome in it. You're like an Irish Steve McQueen. You're great in that movie. The movie's great. People love it.
Yeah.
Stop being like self-conscious about that movie. People love that film. Savage Dog has got a huge cult following. People love it. I said, they love it for a reason, Scott. I've always defended that movie to you, and I've always told you. And just give it the love it deserves and stick it in the roster, because every single time that people talk about, films, Savage Dog is always stuck in there. And there's a reason, because you created an incredible, the movie is visceral. It's got a real great kind of 70s feel to it. And Scott comes across, kind of like this great Irish Steve McQueen rugged guy.
Yeah.
And it's a very different character. And, now it's funny because now, well-rounded all the way around,
yeah,
everybody's in agreement about the film. Scott is kind of, giving love to the film now and gets that his fans, really regard it. But it out of all of the movies that we did together, as the first film, it was a real challenge. And there were a lot of hurdles and there was a lot of hard work that had to go into it, but we got it done. And the final result, the proof's in the pudding, the final film, I'll defend that film to anybody.
And as will I. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, it was sort of a turning point for me, because choreographing it and working with Scott and working with Jesse, I pushed extra hard on all fronts, in terms of, luckily everybody agreed with my take on the style of the action, and that, Jesse was happy and Scott was happy because we kept it grounded and realistic and violent. There are no superhero moments in that movie. There's no moments, there's no there's no, it's the film that it is. And I think the reason it works so well, why it's following now, is because we stuck to our guns about having faith that this is just a different Scott Adkins movie. And Avengement wound up being the exact same thing, in terms of there was an absolute dogged pushing of the envelope of saying, this is different. This isn't one of your other characters. This is not Ninja 2. This is not Boyka. This isn't the Undisputed films. We are purposely trying to go in a completely different direction. Everybody's got to be aboard. Everybody's got to really push in order to get this final result. And, there are moments in both of those films where Scott turns performance moments that I'll always remember and love, because they're moments where it just shines and Scott just thumbs his nose at the world and going, tell me I'm not an actor. And there are small performance movies in both of those movies that are just top-notch, incredible, dramatic, subtle, A-level performance.
I agree too. And another thing I wanted to point out about that as well is because we've touched upon Jesse's work in the movie here, but I think for me, and I'm not sure, I'm pretty sure you may agree with this as well, is that I think some of the best performances we ever got out of Scott's filmographies here are really coming from Jesse's films. Like the first thing we pointed out, he was Savage Dog. I remember seeing that movie and I was like, this is by far his best performance. And then of course, I think Debt Collector 1 and 2, I thought was one of the top performances he has on his resume. And it really wasn't until Avengement where I think a lot of people took notice of him, of what he could do as an actor in terms of what he's been able to pull off here. But I think a lot of it really does have to do with Jesse's direction in the story that he helped kind of craft along the way as well, too. Because that's one thing I think a lot of people may not realize, in my opinion, is that I kind of pointed out before, because I did a review for Action Man 2, Hitman's Holiday. And as much as I love the movie, and I think it's a great film, I really do love the movie, but I think the first one is better because there's something about, I feel like that Jesse did in the character development stories that, not to say the second one didn't have it, definitely had it, but I think Jesse did a little bit better when it came to directing the character's arc, if you will. And that's one thing that I think he does very well. In my opinion, that's his bread and butter, when he really does take the time to delve into some of the more, what's the best way I could explain it here? Like, I wouldn't say the complexities about the characters, but just more about the hurdles and how they have to learn how to deal with it in a fashion that is clearly in front of them, but they have yet to face it. Now they're going to have to face it, and they have to find a way to overcome those said hurdles in some way or shape or form that makes it a compelling, in my opinion, character arc that makes it very a wonderful way of us being the audience member to be invested in the story. I don't mean to sound cliche when I say that here, but I do mean that though. But I think a lot of it is really with Jesse's direction in those stories and the films that we're talking about here, because it's one thing that Scott can do what he did, but I really do believe one of the major ingredients to that overall piece there is Jesse's direction in the story. Because, as I mentioned before, as much as I love X-Men 2, which I still think it is a great movie, X-Men 1 I think was just a notch or two better, just because of the arc and the time that we have with the characters in that respective film. Whereas in the second one, we have them, but it became more. What's the best way I could describe it? It really became more of an action film than it did more of a story, if that makes any sense. So, not to throw shade at the directors, I think they've done a really good job, but I think Jesse, in my opinion, is one of the key ingredients that makes all this work out well. Because here's what I wanted to lead into next year with you, because this is something that I pointed out with your performances in both films, in Hell Hath No Fury and also with White Elephant, is that, especially with Hell Hath No Fury, which I think, in my opinion, at this point right now, is Jesse's best film that he's done so far at this very moment. I think the performance he's able to get out of everybody, yourself, Lewis, obviously Nina and Tim, Dominic and Daniel Bernhardt, just the various actors that are in the movies as well. But I think everyone in that film have been able to showcase something that they have been able to show before in other various films, but in this one movie, I think it really just showcases all the strength as an actor, especially for Nina. That was the film that I think made me realize how good of an actress Nina was, because of the script that Jesse and Catherine had also put together here, and fine-tuning some of the details with these characters. But also at the same time, it wasn't, I think, because the way the movie had been promoted was like his action World War II movie, which is the furthest from that, which I understand why they did that. But the reason I'm bringing this up in this movie is because for your performance, I think that was really where I took notice of you as an actor, where, when I looked at your performance, for example, like in Avengement, you had a bit of a cameo, which I didn't realize was you until I learned it after the fact when I saw your episode on the Corridor Cruise YouTube channel. But it was that movie that really made me take notice of you as an actor. And then when I noticed it again in White Elephant and showcasing some of the more the subtle hints of the characters, I guess, ranking, if you will, in these respective gangs. But it's something that I thought you showed, because when I watch you talk, even now in this conversation, you have a very assertive personality. But in the movies, on the other hand, you kind of have the same personality, but it's almost like as if though you're like in the back of the line type of thing, if that makes any sense here. So I guess what I'm trying to point out here for you is that, because you've been able to take on a project like that, where you've been able to not only showcase what you can do in terms of the coordinating side of it here, but you also get to showcase what you've been able to do as an actor as well. And I'm wondering if a lot of it had to do with the fact that Jesse had trusted you and knowing that you would be able to pull it off, or if that's something you had to work with him and say, hey, Jesse, I like this part. I would love for you to consider me to take on this role, because I think I can do the job. And then if Jesse was confident, say, all right, well, let's go through the audition process, or if he had the utmost faith in you and said, you know what, I think you're perfect, let's go with it and see how it turns out.
He is absolutely very much an actor's director, and he knows what he wants. And Jesse's creativity and Jesse's drive as a director, rival hundreds of other directors. He's very open, very trusting, but he knows what he wants. And when he starts to see something developing, he pushes for that. When in regards between Jesse and I, it's very funny because we're friends and we've worked together for so many years. We have a very odd relationship in terms of, we can freak people out on set because we're like younger and older brother, and we squabble. But we squabble for the same thing. We're both squabbling for the quality of the film. And, we always, settle it right at that second. But Jesse's very trusting in that when he wants to put me in a film, and he gives me a part, I'll tell you how trusting he is. He's trusting to the point where in a lot of cases, my character's dialogue won't be written. And there'll be a lot of scenes where I literally ad lib what's going on in the scene. There are moments in, he trusted me in it, at least 40%, 30 to 40% of Hell Hath No Fury is my just being in the character of Chris and being in the moment. And, you know, especially in terms of like my death scene in that film, yes, he trusted me. He just rolled the cameras and let me do my thing and watched me carefully and knew. And I kind of looked at him because I'm like, Jeff, you're my director. You got to tell me, is it good? Am I going in the wrong direction? And he just kind of looked at me and went, no, that was good. That was a nice performance. And when we did other projects, like when I was in Avengement, none of that was scripted. And originally, the part that Mark Strange was playing in the film was supposed to be my fight scene. So when Mark is fighting Scott in the tavern, that was my fight. But what had happened was I got injured. Doing the dumbest thing, I dislocated my shoulder. And we had to swap parts. And Scott wanted to strangle me because he was just like, really? And I was like, it's fine, it's fine. We'll take my choreography, we'll take the stuff that I was supposed to do in the fight, and we'll give half of it to Mark, and we'll give half of it to Lee, and then I'll be the guy who gets shot in the leg. And because originally, Jesse was like, you'll be the guy who gets blasted in the leg. And then Scott and I were like, well, no, we've never had a chance to do a fight together. We want to do a fight together. So it was going to be somebody else that got shot in the leg, and I was going to do the fight scene with Mark, and then it got flopped back. So that's how I wound up doing that part. And, you know, my whole performance in that was in the moment. You know, literally Jesse's directing me on the side and, you know, scream more and give me more eyes. And this is so painful. And Jesse's directing me as we're going. And so that whole performance was right there in the moment. And so Jesse, the number of times Jesse's been very trusting in terms of in every single movie that I've done an acting part in one of Jesse's films, there's always wound up being more dialogue than was written. And Jesse's always been happy with the final performance. You know, I think once in our whole career together, I think Jesse was like, all right, Luke, less mustache twirling. And I was like, oh shit, am I going too big? And he's like, yeah, just less mustache twirling, just smaller, more subtle, be yourself. And, you know, he's my director. I listen to him, and but we've got a relationship that I cherish in that way. In that, I always kind of play semi-similar characters, kind of the underdog, back of the line, guy in the group that's been getting kicked around and teased, and there's a through line there, and I go with it. You know, Jesse likes when I play those characters, and he knows that I can play them well. And I like playing those characters because I'm very much a character actor. Very early on in my career, my first film was The Karate Kid.
Right.
That was my first actual movie. And I was able to audition Karate Kid 2. And when I auditioned for Karate Kid 2, I auditioned for the lead villain. And what happened in that audition was John Avildsen, who was a brilliant director, you know, may he rest in peace, literally called me back into his office and was very candid and very kind to me and said, I'm just going to tell you up front, you were one of the top 3 guys in consideration for this role, but you're not going to get it. And I was super disappointed, but he goes, I'm going to tell you why. You're too real. The audience, if I shoot you, the audience is never going to believe that Ralph Macchio beats you. And I started to him and ha and oh, but no, but I'm an actor. I can change. I can change my character. And he says, no, you can't. He says there's a because of how you grew up in bad neighborhoods, and the whole reason you started teaching martial arts was for survival. He goes, there's something about you, there's a realistic edge that you can't get rid of. And the audience is never going to believe that you as a character got your ass kicked by Ralph Macchio. And I had to accept that. But that was a turning point in terms of me recognizing that I wanted to be more of a character actor and that I had no interest in trying to play lead parts, because lead parts in many aspects were too rigid, too limiting. And I suddenly realized I don't want to be one of the leads. I want to be the goofy guy. I want to be the outcast. I want to be the nut. I want to be the guy who's totally off kilter, who steals the scene, gets the funny line, makes you remember him. And I've been, I've had the opportunity now for, over 25 years to do that. And I've had, a number of acting roles, in Jesse's films and other movies where I was really, really happy to be allowed to give the kind of performances and play the type of characters where I was working to my own strengths. And, I haven't had any performances where I really felt like anything got shortchanged. The only time there was a disappointment was in White Elephant. I had a sequence with Bruce, and I felt like the sequence was really good because it was after the shootout in the restaurant, and I had to gather up Bruce, and I had to beg him for us to leave because everybody was dead and the police were coming. And the scene kind of, it went off script. And I felt like the scene still completely worked. Whereas other people, not really Jesse, but other people kind of questioned it and overthought it and picked it apart to the point where it got cut out of the movie. And I was disappointed because it was an acting scene with Bruce Willis, but enough of my performance stayed in that movie as that character that I was okay with it. But Jesse, as a director, it's always been a good experience for me because, like I said, he's trusting. He's not overbearing. He trusts you and lets you go places as an actor. And, Jesse was the one who figured out in Debt Collector, when that relationship, when that vibe between Scott and Louis started to gel, Jesse let it go. Jesse saw it and was like, I'm just going to let this happen, because that wasn't scripted. When that whole dichotomy between the two of them started in Debt Collector, part of that was Louis' decision as an actor. And Scott got where Louis was going with it. And as actors, they just went with it 200%. And Jesse recognized it and went, this is brilliant. Go with it. Do it. And Jesse saw it and cultivated it and allowed it. And, that's where that whole thing started. And it was because Jesse's so gracious and Jesse gives that freedom to his actors. Another director might have stepped on that. Another director might have gone, you guys are now doing something different than that was in the script. This is different. I don't know that I like this because as a director, I'm not in control of what you and Scott are doing. And so another director might have crushed that creative moment. And Jesse didn't. Jesse was like, go for it. And again, his giving nature in terms of him seeing artistic creativity, he cultivated it and let it happen. And so when it, I've always been appreciative, besides Jesse being my friend and my director, and we've worked together for over 20 years. I'm really appreciative of Jesse's giving nature and being an actor's director, as well as Jesse pushing for the most dramatic, the best performance, what's going to work the best. He's always striving to make a scene better. It doesn't matter what the scene is. And Jesse's always pushing the envelope in terms of he's confined by nothing. And that's been more so over the last 10 years. I mean, I've had moments where in my head, I was like, Jesse, what the hell are you doing? But I recognized that he was going somewhere. Like, I'll tell you, Hell Hath No Fury, Jesse pushed the envelope there.
Yeah, I agree.
To get that performance out of you. And Jesse was doing this where I literally almost put the shoulder at the monitor, and as a friend was going to be like, dude, what are you doing? And then I realized this is Jesse. He's pushing the envelope right now. I have to shut up. I'm not the director. I'm his friend, and we work closely together. But Jesse really, really pushed the envelope. In terms of that movie, he was super hard on Nina. And, one of the reasons why that performance is so nuanced and tortured is because Nina really went through a lot of that stuff. There's a sequence in the behind the scenes where I literally wind up giving Nina a big hard slap across her thigh to replicate the gunshot wound when she gets shot and falls down. And that's what she wanted. And at first I wasn't comfortable with it. And Nina and I talked, and I said, I'll do it if that's what you want. And we did it. And, it was merciless, but the final result shows up in the movie. And Jesse is intuitive and driven when it comes to pulling those dramatic performances out of his actors, and the actors trusting Jesse that they know that he's going somewhere with everything. Jesse doesn't do anything arbitrarily. He knows what he's doing. Even if the rest of the crew doesn't know, Jesse knows where he's pushing the envelope and why. And that's why you get the performances that you do. And that's why with Jesse's films, the end result is always more, because Jesse won't allow anything to limit the final result of his film. And he works tirelessly. I mean, we wrap on a film, and for 4 to 6 months afterwards, Jesse is still in there working on the film, getting these nuanced moments, re-editing, thinking about pickup shots, just like going through every inch of the film and not settling at any moment for like, well, this is good enough. You're never, ever going to hear Jesse Johnson say, well, this is good enough. And that's why the films come out the way they do. That's why when you watch a movie and it's a Jesse Johnson film, those dramatic moments, those artistic moments, the overall feel of the movie, that's Jesse pushing to get the movie to that point. And in some instances, he's had producers and he's had people on the movie where they're like, no, good. No, we're okay with this. And Jesse's like, the movie's not done yet. And that's why Avengement and Have No Fury, a lot of these other films have that end feeling that they have is because Jesse's sculpting that, and he's digging into the clay to get that finished form, to have that sculpture be finished, so that if it's supposed to show tortured remorse, Jesse's going to make sure that the end result shows tortured remorse or triumph or reconciliation, whatever it is. He's going to make sure at the end of that film that that's what you feel.
You know, with your performance with Hell Hath No Fury, I was actually curious to see if you were at all involved with, because, you know, Jesse had, because I talked with Catherine before, and obviously Nina as well too. Both of them had said that they were able to see a very, you know, some sort of edit of the movie up to that point. And then I think once Jesse had finalized the final edit of the movie, he kind of more or less had like a, I guess like a presentation, if you will, to everyone that was involved with that whole editing process, some way or shape or form. Were you ever part of that as well too, and kind of being able to see how everything had turned out? And then if you were, when you started seeing the pieces being put together, how did you first feel about you, not just what the overall product in itself, but as far as your performance are concerned? Because, like I said before, for me, that was a film that made me look at you differently as an actor, if you will, because that was where I started to notice more about you talked before about nuances and pushing the limits and whatever the case may be that you have with Jesse's films. But in this particular case here, when you started looking at the edit of the movie and seeing how you have performed, how your performers were coming together in the final cut, did you have a look at yourself at a slightly different angle where you realize that, you know what, I actually know? I mean, I'm wondering what your level of confidence was in terms of acting, because you've done it before on several occasions here, but if this one performance kind of made you look at yourself more differently because of not just because of the preparation, but being able to do something slightly different and more or less out of I wouldn't say out of your comfort zone, but just to be a little more creative in that process, because you mentioned before you improvise 30% of the lines there, but being able to take that opportunity to kind of stretch out the acting muscle, if you will. So I'm curious to see how your perspective might change once you started seeing everything be put together throughout that process.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that as an actor for that film, I made a decision. I looked at what everyone else's character decisions were. And I noticed that everybody was kind of playing a hard, chiseled, rugged archetype. And so I immediately, as an actor, chose to not do that. I chose that my character wasn't a badass. My character, part of him didn't want to be there. And part of him wanted to get back to his family in Brooklyn. And part of him was part of the team and would die for any of the guys there. But he was always thinking. And that's why his character is always cussing and questioning, because he doesn't get to make the decisions. He's got to follow orders. And so there was a little bit of me in the character of Chris in terms of kind of harumphing and grumping and cussing and kicking things, because he knows that he's not in charge. And there were moments where there were things that I was going to ad lib, and I didn't, because even though they were poignant, even though they were true to the character and they were funny, it diverted the attention in the scene. And I'm not that kind of actor. I'm not a selfish actor. I'm not going to, steal the scene. But the moment when we're all sitting in the ditches and Nina keeps pointing different directions, there was a moment, because there was a bigger piece of dialogue there that got cut out from Tim. And there's a moment when Nina's pointing and I almost spit this line out, where I was going to go, oh, here we go again with Babe Ruth pointing at the bleachers for the home run. Any of you guys buying this shit? Come on. And it was completely in line with my character. And it's something that, you know, my character would absolutely spit out. But it would have taken away from the moment that was happening with Nina. The whole idea was when there's dead silence and Nina just points. There's a moment there in terms of starting storytelling with Nina's character's determination to survive. And her definitively pointing was like, I am going to lead these guys down the rabbit hole because it's going to mean that I survive. And I knew, I sat there and said, in one way, this is true to my character, and it'd be a funny moment and it'd be completely poignant, but it diverts the attention in the scene. And so I'm going to leave this alone. And even though it's funny as shit, and I know I can make it work, and my delivery, and it would be a funny moment, the damn movie's not about me. It's about all of us. So I didn't do it. And when I got to see one of the cuts of the film, I could see how everyone had developed. And the interesting thing and the great thing was that Jesse, in a very short period of time, Jesse had done a great job of getting us to gel and bond as a group. So in terms of these guys that are stuck together in this war and are supposed to have this past history, Jesse was very much responsible for getting that feeling. And all of us as actors making decisions about who our characters were and how we interrelated. I mean, it just wound up being that Tim and I, we just both suddenly decided that our characters had a little bit more of a relationship in terms of giving each other shit and razzing each other, because he was from the Midwest and I was from Brooklyn. And he and I wouldn't see things the same way at all. He was very much a cowboy and a yokel, and I was very much a city boy. And even though it's immensely subtle, that whole bit where he's reassuring me and I'm sitting there calling him a hayseed, the relationship, no matter how small, there's glints of it in there. And the same thing between Louis and I, when, you know, I say what I say to him and he replies, and all he says back to me is, Chris, there's a relationship there. He knows me. I know him. He knows that I have respect for him. It's not just a job. You know, he's not just the major and I'm not just who I am. We're like a mini family. And that all, you know, very, very subtly comes across. And it was a culmination of everything. It was Jesse steering the boat and all of us in very, very strange, small ways being connected. Because I've been a friend of Louis and a friend of Tim's for decades. And we love each other to death. We tease each other all the time, but I love Tim to death and I love Louis to death. And I think it's that comfort level that we're comfortable with each other and we're like family and we know each other, that was allowed to come across between the characters. And as always, Jesse recognizes these things and he lets them happen. And, you know, when I saw the edit of the film, I could tell where Jesse had gone with it, because I'll tell you something. This is a behind the scenes fact. Jesse and I went out and shot tons of pickups on the gun battle. We went out and shot so many pickups to make that gun battle bigger, more personal. We took a friend of Jesse's family who was a kid named Ben, who was literally like 14 years old, and stuck him in a German uniform and filmed shots with him, because very few films have ever depicted the truth that in the late years of the war, old men and kids were stuck into uniforms. So the reality of that time, at that time in the war, is entirely plausible that you would have faced a 14-year-old kid in a German uniform. So we stuck it in the movie. And that, again, was part of Jesse's filmic process of wanting to flesh out what the movie was going to be. Jesse is in the movie as one of the German soldiers.
I saw that.
And let me tell you, that sequence where he gets shot and falls back into the grave, Jesse threw himself and flipped back into the grave and landed on his neck from 4 feet up and just wrecked into that grave, because Jesse, having been a stuntman, wasn't going to do anything half-ass. And I was literally there operating camera and had to keep my cool and keep the camera steady when I knew and heard how bad he hit. And I had to make sure that I caught it on film. I couldn't let him fall out of frame. I had to snap and tilt down and get Jesse wrecking like that. But again, you know, that is another layer of how the film gets stretched out, and there are layers put into the movie. And, you know, that's something that Jesse is doggedly determined to always do. You know, he looks at something and he goes, it's not enough. It's almost there, but it's not there. And, you know, we went back out for days and shot this extra piece, that extra piece, this guy running and getting shot, this piece, that grave. And, you know, it's his process, even after the film has wrapped, trying to get that final product where, you know, he looks at it and he knows it's right. And, you know, he's very good in terms of trusting me with the action, you know,
which are good, by the way. I think it was really well put together.
Yeah, I mean, I was very, very proud of the action in Hell Hath No Fury, because we both had a mantra that we wanted it to be real and we didn't want it to be Hollywood.
Right.
We wanted you to feel like there was chaos. We wanted you to feel how death is arbitrary and guys just suddenly, bang, they're running through frame and they get shot and they're gone. And there's no lingering on it. That guy's just gone and you're on to the next person because, you know, of the idea of the anonymous soldier, and that's how war is. So, you know, when we crafted that whole sequence, that was the driving factor. It was the same way when I choreographed the knife fight between Tim and the German soldier who was played by stuntman Remy Bakar. We really had this mantra of my saying, I want this to be horrible and bloody and real, and I don't want it to feel like choreography, and I want to make the audience say, oh shit. And, you know, and it was Jesse too. We were both in agreement. You know, Jesse was sitting there growling, going, I want it bloody. I want it vicious. I want to make the audience wince. And I said, you got it. I agree. You know, and, you know, we worked really hard on that. And a lot of the other stunt guys admittedly came to me and were shocked and said, how the hell did you do that? You know, I had no idea what you were going to do at the start when you started putting that together. And now that it's finished, I don't understand how you started with nothing and made this kind of hyper-realistic, violent, wincing, uncomfortable looking fight. And I just told them, I said, I always look at when I'm going to choreograph a piece of violence. One, I like things that are realistic. Two, they've got to be original. I really don't. I'm very stubborn as a fight choreographer in that I won't lift something from anybody else ever. Somebody can say I want it to feel like something, but oh, well, just copy this. And I'm like, nope, you got the wrong guy for that. I'll never do that.
I
You
see
know,
what you're
I
saying.
will
Okay.
I will create something, but I'm going
I
to
got
create
you.
something for this movie. I'm never going to sit there and take, I had a hilarious moment where I got into a giant argument with a top level stunt coordinator buddy of mine where we were barking at each other on stage and he was going, just do it. And I'm going, F you, I'm not doing that. You and I together, if we can't come up with something more creative, why the hell are we here? And he looked at me and was like, oh, fine. And I came back to him and I went, here's the choreography. If you hate it, tell me. And we went through it and he goes, all right, shit, I was wrong. You were right. It's great. Let's just shoot it. And so that's one of the things about me as a stunt coordinator and fight choreographer. I always stick to my guns about, no, this is the action for this movie. And when somebody watches this movie, I don't ever want them to look at it and go, oh, well, they lifted this from that, or that's taken obviously from this. Even when, I'm going to be honest with you, even when Scott and I did the homage to They Live in
Oh
Debt
yeah. Yeah,
Collectors,
and the second one, yeah.
you know, I was really adamant about going, no, no, no. We're doing an homage, but it's our choreo. I'm not copying shit. I'm not going to go in and Scott was kind of looking at me sideways. And I said, trust me, because it was Scott's idea. It was entirely Scott's idea that he wanted to do this kind of redo of the giant alley fight from They Live. And I went, okay, cool. I get it. Let's go for it. And Scott and I took weeks choreographing that fight.
Really?
And yeah, I mean, we took like 2 weeks and we went into the gym every day and
Hmm.
we argued and we squabbled and we joked. And there were moments when, Scott's looking at me going, that's not what goes here. And I'm like, yes, it is, because we changed it 3 times. And he's like, oh shit, you're right. We did change it. And it developed and developed and developed. And I mean, Scott and I have a very interesting way of working together because I love Scott and Scott's phenomenal. And we will, it's a collaboration always. And every once in a while there'll be a sticking point and we have funny moments where I stick to my guns. And he's like, well, I don't know if I want to do that. And I'm like, do you trust me? Why'd you hire me? I'm not going to give you something stupid to do. Like, do you ever notice in our films together, I always have Scott do that under the arm uppercut?
Yeah, yeah, I have noticed that. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, that's a signature between Scott and I for Scott's movies that he does with me. I came up with that. And when we were doing it in Debt Collectors, Scott didn't want to do it because he was sitting there going, this is a pain in the ass. Uppercuts are a bitch. And if you're off by a quarter of an inch, it doesn't sell. And I'll just do a crossing punch. And we got in an argument. I went, you're not doing a crossing punch here because you've already thrown a billion lefts and rights. I said, do you know why I'm making you do this? Because you look badass when you do it right. And it's now a thing. And I'm not going to let it go. And sure enough, we were in there. We were in the bar fight. We did it. We got a perfect take. Scott looked at the playback and was like grumbling at me. Was like, all right. And we have that relationship where when you're under the gun and you're trying to do something,
That's
every
funny.
once in a while, Scott and I will stick to our guns and we'll have this back and forth. And it's never about one of us winning. It's about us agreeing that something's a good idea.
Interesting.
And, we have a good relationship in that way. And Scott's always been very, very generous to me in terms of the comedic thing about both of us is he'll have moments when he's like, I don't want to do that. I don't trust you. And we argue about it. And then it gets finished and we agree. And it's the same sort of thing. Scott has an idea and he's like, we're going to do this here, and I'm like, okay, the whole bit in Debt Collectors when he's fighting Louis and Louis grabs the bottle.
Yeah.
And that was all Scott when he grabs the bottle and Scott redirects it and punches the bottle out of his hand. That was all Scott's idea. And, I just looked at him. I looked him in the face. I went, fucking brilliant. There was no back and forth about it. I was like, I get it, buddy. It's fucking awesome. Let's shoot it. Again, it's a collaborative effort. And I've always been really appreciative of Scott as a professional and Scott as a friend, that we were able to work together like that.
There's a
And
question I wanted to ask you about real quickly, because there's something that you've shared on several occasions before about your the amount of work that you do, and I'm not sure if the question I'm going to ask you is a fair question to ask, because I think every project has a certain, there's always some hurdles are much bigger than others, but I'm wondering if at any point during your career, if you've ever taken on a project that maybe at one point you felt like you bit off more than you could chew, and to the point where, I'm not saying you doubted yourself, but maybe you may have felt like, I think I've kind of hit a wall where I'm not saying reach a limit, but I think I may have to reevaluate how I'm going about it, because the way I thought I was going about it before was working. I don't think it's working now, and we're already this knee deep into the project that I can't go back and re-choreograph everything. And so I'm wondering if you have those moments in any project you may have worked on, where you felt like you've kind of got to that point where may have bit off more than you could chew, but you've found a way to deal with it and be able to come up with a pretty good product in terms of the fight choreography or the stunt coordination. And when you look back and you realize, it wasn't as bad as I remembered it, but I do know from going through that experience, next time around, I know what my limitations are. Therefore, I know what I need to work on, or for right now, avoid this until I can get more time to be working on that, to be able to do that in the next project that would require for me to do these set coordinations, if you will.
Not a number of. I've had a couple of films where I had to. It's not necessarily I had to rethink, but I had to take a slightly different tact in how I was doing things. When I did Robert Zemeckis' Beowulf, that was a very, very hard film, because Garrett Warren was stunt coordinating, Jesse was second unit stunt coordinating, and I was the sword master on the film, and Dominic was the fight choreographer.
Right.
That film, there were moments where things got very convoluted because of the politics on set. I suddenly arbitrarily had my credit cut because of a female executive producer that suddenly just decided there were too many pseudo coordinators listed. And she didn't understand what my credit was. So she just had them cut it off the call sheet. And I was like, wait a minute. I've been on this film the whole time. I gave a history lecture to all of your actors. I trained all your actors for swordplay. I went to the property master and changed all the swords because the swords were all incorrect and they weren't real Viking swords. And I'm helping Dominic and Garrett with the choreography. And now you're just going to arbitrarily take my credit away. I had to, on that picture, realize that politics are politics, and there was no point in trying to push for my credit or for a certain level of recognition, because there was a bigger wheel turning. There was a larger picture at hand in terms of this was a studio picture, and they were very big producers, and who was I? And so I had to change my tact and kind of grit my teeth and be a stunt guy and get listed as a stunt guy, which most people, would totally understand is an absolute crime, because you're doing all of this work and then you just kind of get thrown into the barrel with everybody else. But the schedule and the number of changes on that film were so fast and furious that I had to change and adapt a lot of things that I was doing. All of a sudden, like 3 weeks, 4 weeks into production, I suddenly had to start doing storyboards for the stunt department. And Garrett, was like, I need these. And I said, okay, I'm an artist. I have a degree in art, but I'm not a professional storyboard artist. So yeah, man, I can do these and I'll do this. And you tell me, and I did the storyboards, and grumbling and dissatisfaction about really minor things. And I had to kind of ride that wave and say, hey, look, this wasn't part of the plan. I'm making this up as I go along because, one, I was helping with choreography. Two, at the time I was playing Grendel. I was playing the monster because Crispin Glover hadn't been hired yet. So all of the movement choreography and all of the creature figuring out I was doing on my own. And Garrett was watching what I was doing, and I was saying, well, and they tied my arm up and they gave me different size shoes and they strapped me all up with rubber bands, and it was horribly painful. But I was doing the performance as Grendel, doing these storyboards, being a regular stunt guy, for the film, and helping with choreography. And so I had to let go of certain preconceived notions and just go with the flow and deal with the job at hand. It wasn't something like where I could like stomp my feet and go, I don't want to do this, because I would have gone home. So I had to change my tact in terms of just going with the flow and understanding that the creative process on this movie was kind of liquid. It wasn't something that was already completely set and we were just painting by the numbers. It was, the creativity was happening as we were going. So on $120 million picture like that, you can't stomp your feet. It's not about you. And I had to very quickly realize that, yeah, you're going to lose your Swordmaster credit, but it doesn't matter because this is the job you're in. And, you're going to finish this and it'll be a job that you're proud of. And this is the situation and you have to just adapt and go with it. And so I did. There was another small picture I did that was a David and Goliath movie. And the concepts and the script were very off kilter. They had taken a biblical story and wanted to add all modern action into it. So all of a sudden they wanted to tell this biblical tale of David and Goliath, but they wanted Krav Maga and they wanted martial arts and they wanted knife fighting and they wanted all of this modern action stuck into, and I had to take a turn and go to the producers and the director and go, this isn't going to work. You have to trust me in that I will give you super exciting action, but I feel very strongly that we have to keep this closer to historically accurate because we're going to get judged anyway because we're telling a biblical story, and everybody that's a devout Christian is going to pick this apart. If on top of that, we do a bunch of hi-ya modern action, there's a good chance that we could get like crucified over the internet for this. So I suddenly had to take the job on my shoulders of going away, rewriting big chunks of the script and the action, a lot of dialogue that was modern, and I had to write in descriptives for the characters to describe the fighting technique, the tactics, all within a period biblical context. And I worked really hard on that. And then when it came to doing the action, I kept 95% of it to something that would be historically accurate, but I bumped the action up. So our concept was literally that a fight happened between David and Goliath before the historic event. That David went out into the field and he went out into the valley to do honor to the armies that were watching and confronted Goliath. And in our story, David and Goliath have this giant knockdown, drag out fight. It's sword and shield. And they have this huge fight. And David loses. And David not only loses, but he gets his shield chopped in half. He loses his sword. Goliath throws him all over the place like a rag doll and breaks bones on him, and he's wrecked. And it's at that moment that David realizes he's not using his faith in God, that he's realizing he's being egotistical and selfish. And then he crawls through the sand, grabs his sling, gets a rock, has faith that God is going to lead his hand, and deals the fatal blow to Goliath. Now,
interesting.
It was a very kind of highbrow intellectual take on classic biblical storytelling.
Right.
And we bent it. And we even put a disclaimer in front of the film that said much of this is artistic interpretation of what happened in the in-between times that the Bible doesn't account. So in our story, from the beginning of David and Goliath's story to the end, there's sections within the story itself that are not described, and we filled those in with interpretation. But I had to change my process and come up with something that was going to work. I mean, I put it forth, and then I realized, wow, am I biting off more than I can chew? Because in some cases, this could be looked at as very arrogant because I'm just flat out telling you you're wrong. So if I'm going to tell the producers and the director that they're wrong in their concept, I sure as hell better back myself up and come across with something that they're happy with and that's going to work. And again, because of my work ethic and because of my knowledge of history and weapons and swordplay, I worked diligently about crafting this giant action sequence that was historically accurate, that was, you know, in between the age of bronze and iron, and depicted what a realistic fight of that time would have looked like, so that at least, because we were telling something that wasn't written and that devout Christians might say, this is garbage, the Bible doesn't say this. And we're saying, we know the Bible doesn't say this, but these are the in-between moments that the Bible never wrote about. I had to make sure that at no time was I ever running off of ego. I had to have, the proof had to be in the pudding. I had to like put my money where my mouth was and back myself up and go, man, you better be sure that you're going to deliver. And luckily it all worked great, and they were super happy, and the movie did well, and it sold, and it made way more than its money back. And so it wound up working. But that was one of a couple of moments in my career where, because I changed my course, I had to make sure that I wasn't being an egotistical bastard and that I could back up what I was proposing. And I don't want to know. I can't really say how much of it was luck. I can't say exactly what percentage was knowledge being put forth and it just working out. But those were moments where I had to kind of change my line of thinking. and still deliver a product that worked, that was going to be able to be filmed, stayed in the storyline, and heightened the film. I couldn't sit there and do all this barking and then have them wait and then come across with something where it ruined the movie. And so there have been other times in my career where something has come up and I just look at them and go, I don't know, not my department. I'm not saying squat. That's your artistic and professional executive decision. I'm not saying anything. I'm going to go over here and practice this fight because I don't want to have anything to do with that.
What was the name of that the film that you're talking about here between David and Goliath?
It was called David. It was literally called, I think it was either David versus Goliath or Goliath versus David.
Okay.
And it wasn't a big budget film, and it did do well. It was on Netflix. It was on cable.
Okay.
It wasn't a big film, but it did well commercially in terms of it made way more than its money back. And it did get a really serious ribbing over the internet about the biblical accuracy. Tons of church groups and devout Christians all kind of, that's garbage, and the Bible doesn't say that. And we were like, did you not read the disclaimer that we put at the beginning of the movie?
Yeah.
It's everything's a process. And no matter what you do, in the end, you're putting forth something that on one level or another, it's still a gamble. You put across your artistic vision between the entire film crew, and you put it out there into the world, and it does what it does. And I'll tell you something, when we were talking initially about how the industry has changed and how things have been affected in terms of how stunt coordinators and action directors and even directors, people like Chad Stahelski and people like David Leitch are, and even now JJ Perry, they've moved up from second year director and stunt coordinator legitimately into directing films, and have proven themselves as professional directors who deliver fantastic movies. And we absolutely do want this trend to continue, because an action movie is still an action movie.
Right.
And we stuntmen always joke when we're making a movie and the giant action sequences start getting pushed back in the day, and they start shooting strange, arbitrary things and little dialogue sequences, and they come to us and we've all got this face, and they go, "What's the matter?" And we go, "Hey, I just want to remind you, you are not shooting a rom-com. This isn't a romantic comedy. When you cut this trailer, what's going to sell the trailer? The action. This is an action movie." And more often than not, the light bulb goes off over their head and they're like, "Oh, crap, you're right." And they start setting up to shoot the action sequence. And now, in a lot of ways, the order of filming, the level of importance in terms of keeping focus has changed, and more production companies are realizing that a certain amount of attention absolutely has to be given to the action in the film. There can't be this weird, arbitrary, "Well, you guys are the stunt guys, you'll be able to just do it." And it's like, no, we're not just stunt guys. We're filmmakers also, and we want to give you the best product. We want to give you the best thing possible. And you should know, as well as we know, this sequence is going to take 2 days. This sequence might take a week. This sequence might take this long. Please don't give us 6 hours to do it. Please don't, limit us to 1 day, because it's just not going to work. And I think that the tide has turned in terms of people recognizing that. And the level in action movies has absolutely come up tenfold.
Yeah, I agree.
And we're capable of doing action in movies now, when between practical effects, CGI, and stunt coordinators and fight choreographers having a lot more at their disposal, we're able to create new levels of action in terms of when you see the finished product in the movie. There's a reason why the action's that big. There's a reason why the action has come out that good, because the time has been given to craft, rehearse, and choreograph all that action. Whereas before, back in the day, we were never given the amount of time that we needed to really develop the action. One, from choreography to training the actors to performing. But nowadays, camera angles, techniques, wire gags, and everything else at our disposal to be able to literally craft a different type and a different level of action, because we are a lot more hands-on involved in the actual filmmaking when it comes to action scenes. And so I'm really hoping, and I'm really excited to see where this goes in the future, because it's funny, because right now I'm prepping to do a Jean-Claude Van Damme film, and it's a different level for me, because I'm happy because I get to work with another legend. I get to work with Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Right.
And I'm excited about that. And I'm excited about just having had conversations with the director and with Jean-Claude about what the action is going to be like in the film. And all coming to an agreement that stylistically we're going in another direction, and that we want to show a new side and a new style for Jean-Claude. And so we're really all excited to develop that and push that envelope that way. But my point being that 15 years ago, that opportunity probably wouldn't have been there. And the things that are happening now on the films that are being made, they wouldn't have been done 20 years ago. They wouldn't have been done 15 years ago, because there was this stigma of, okay, yeah. You're stunt guys, you choreograph the action. You let us worry about the camera angles. You let us worry about blah, 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 blah. And that was why you got things like the Bourne Identity and the Bourne movies, where the nightmarish shaky cam idea came up. That wasn't stunt guys coming up with that idea. That was DPs. That was camera guys thinking that they knew better. And, luckily that pushback, that problem has kind of been solved, in that stunt people have now proven beyond a shadow of a doubt, hey, you can handle the camera when there's dialogue or there's artistic stuff going on. But when it's action, give us the damn camera. These are the camera angles. This is how this is being shot. And we're able to prove our theories now, and we're able to prove our artistic merit by giving a final product where when somebody looks at it, we say, yeah, well, it's previs. We designed this from beginning to end. All the camera angles are ours. All of the effects and the technique in this are ours. The concept from beginning to end is something we came up with. It's not, oh, you're meathead stunt guys, do your martial arts stuff, and then let us handle the rest. It's no longer like that, because there's an education level now where people have been forced into understanding that we're putting forth something that's brand new, and we're being allowed to 100% do our job and craft action in movies the way it's supposed to be done. And I think that that's something in terms of a trend that's going to now continue and just go up. And then the other thing is, we're still doing this while maintaining 100% safety. And so, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that was something that I wanted to bring up with you as well too. But you're actually gonna get into something that I think was really important to highlight here, because what I was gonna interject real quickly was that you know the I think a lot of people, when you talk about the the respect that goes with coordinated fight sequences or a stunt scene, whatever the case may be. Some people don't factor in the fact that, okay, we only have 6 hours to do this said scene, but you need more time to be able to put all the pieces together so that way you can do it in an effective manner that will not only not injure the actor and everyone else involved with the sequences as well too, but also to be able to have them fresh enough to be able to do another take because of the amount of work that's involved with doing the said scenes, whatever, in some way or shape or form. So the safety factor behind it too. I'm wondering from your perspective, do you think it's gotten better in terms of like if you have to do something on the fly, and are there ways you guys are more cognizant about how, okay, so before, 15 years ago we didn't have the ability to do X, Y, and Z, but because we can adapt things a little bit more easier now, we're able to do things on the fly without having to be concerned about hurting the actor, hurting the stunt performers, or whoever it may be in that respective sequences there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Things are always developing, and there's a lot of things when you look at now. When you look at movies like Mad Max Fury Road,
Yes.
their use of articulated mannequins and dummies in that movie is trend setting in terms of upping the level of safety. A lot of those car wrecks, a lot of those huge wrecks in that movie, when you see those are mannequins on the vehicles. Those aren't actual stunt guys, because in a lot of those cases, if those had all been actual stunt guys, there would have been a lot of people in the hospital and people might have died, because those sequences were dangerous. They pushed the envelope. Now, in some of those sequences, there are real guys on all those vehicles, and obviously there's somebody really driving. But figuring out how to make a sequence still stay realistic, but minimize risk to stunt performers while you're doing that is another level of an improvement and a transformation moving forward in the film industry, where you're allowing technology to still create great action, but you're actually keeping people safer. And you look at things like there were moments when they were shooting Black Adam, and in the shooting of Black Adam, there were a couple of sequences where high falls were mimicked, where there was a stunt guy way up high. He got hit and he got zapped, took the reaction there, stayed there, did the reaction all the way down on the ground, and the entire fall was CG'd. Now, I'm okay with that on a safety level. On a work level, it's not so great,
Yeah.
because there's a lot less opportunity for money, because you have guys who are brilliant high fall people and get paid extra money to perform a really dangerous high fall. And I'm not somebody that wants to see high falls or really dangerous stunts go away altogether, because I don't really agree with that, but I do agree with a heightened level of safety. So if nowadays there's a way to do a seriously risky stunt and do it with the aid of practical effects or CGI, and it's done well, I'm all for that, because there's a lot less risk for the stunt performer. And I think that as the film industry progresses, we're only going to see more changes happening, because, as stunt performers, we've always got to be super cognizant of safety,
Right.
and we have to be pushing that envelope as well. It's not just creatively. We've always got to be thinking about new elements of safety and new ways to do things where we can still get the end result we want. I mean, I'll give you a perfect example. you look at movies now and there's a new reaction that came up. I can't say exactly when. I kind of want to say about 10 years ago. And it's called a scorpion, where you see a guy do a front fall. He lands on his chest and his shoulder, and he allows his legs to flop over forward and almost touch his head, where it looks like his back has been broken. They did it a lot in J.J. Perry's Day Shift, and it was done
Oh
very, very
yeah, yeah,
well.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's also done in Black Adam.
Yes.
That's a new stunt reaction, and they found a way to perform it safely. I mean, we had movies back in the day where that literally happened by accident. And it stayed in the movie, and we're all kind of surrounding the stunt guy and going, "Oh my
Yeah.
God, dude, are you okay?" And he's like, "I don't want to move. That really hurt. I got a chiropractic adjustment that I didn't want." And the
Mm.
stunt guy wound up being okay, but literally it was out of something that wasn't supposed to happen. And now, as action is developed, you've got this reaction called a scorpion that stunt guys can perform that looks horrendous, but can be done completely safely. And
Interesting.
so the envelope, you've always got to be like pushing the envelope. You've always got to be like trying to strive to do more. And I'm a big advocate of, I want to see a new fight scene. I want to see a new fight style. I would love it if somebody came up with some kind of alien fighting style that didn't incorporate anything in terms of physical basics that we all have to go through for a fight scene. Now, is that daunting and a ridiculously difficult task? Yes, but that's our job. It's not just about being physically talented and being martial artists and being able, it's not only about that. It's about this. Creatively, somebody's got to come up with a new fight. Somebody's got to come up with a whole new style. They came up with John style. Guess what? John Wick style is old hat now.
Yeah.
We've seen it in 3 movies. We're about to see it in 4. But even Chad and all the guys realize that they have to up the level, that they have to change it. They can't rest on their merits and keep doing the same thing.
Yeah.
So they're all constantly pushing the envelope to go, within the world we've created, we still have to up the level and push on ourselves for the next action sequence. And that is why we're having this creative renaissance of all of these new action movies, where we're getting better action, more exciting action, things we haven't seen before, because 1, we've been given the opportunity to take the reins, and 2, we're doing it. It's not like it's honorary. We are literally taking the reins, directing, and giving people brand new content and brand new styles of action. And I can't wait to see where this all goes, because it's an exciting time. And I really like the fact that everybody is still being very, very safety conscious. We're always doing what stunt people need to do, which is keeping all the actors safe and creating brand new action. And that's what's happening now. And I think it's only going to continue. I'm looking forward to it. I think that, with new opportunities, that's where new levels of, where you're going to get new levels of creativity. When I just recently, I finished a film that came out called Section 8.
Yeah.
And I did another movie for those same production people called Lights Out with Frank Grillo that'll be coming out probably this upcoming year. I was given a really great opportunity in that with Section 8, I was in charge of every single bit of the action. And I was given complete creative freedom in terms of what I came up with and how much action. And we wound up putting more action in Section 8 than was originally in the movie. And, I was really happy to be able to have an amazing stunt team with me and great stunt performers, where I pushed on the envelope and I said, we got to do more. And we did. So we wound up getting more action into the film than was originally supposed to be in the movie. The end fight sequence between Scott
And Ryan.
and Ryan,
Yeah.
I went away and previs that. I went away and took that and previs the hell out of it and sent it to Scott. I sent it to Scott in England. Scott looked at it and Scott signed off on it. Scott said, great, awesome, I like it. And we shot that previs exactly. Scott changed a couple of minor things, but I mean, that basically was the fight that we created. And it's the same thing when we created it was the same issue. I looked at it and I went, I cannot do the same thing. I've got to come up with elements in this that are a different fight for Scott. So I added that knife fight in, and I added moments into the fight where Scott's character could be different. Scott's character could be a little bit more vicious because he was a bad guy. He could be a little more sarcastic. And the developing layers in the fight are an opportunity for Ryan and for Scott to allow their characters to develop while the fight's going on. And my final thing that I pushed for the fight was that Ryan outsmarts Scott. Ryan can't physically beat Scott. He cannot beat his character. Scott's character is way more vicious and a better fighter, and Ryan winds up using tactics. And Ryan remembers where the gun is. When the gun gets kicked under the couch in the sequence, Ryan never forgets that. And when you watch the fight sequence, Ryan's character purposely brings the fight back to the couch and gets the gun and gets the drop on Scott. So when you watch that fight sequence again, that's an Easter egg that I put in the fight on purpose so that when people watch it in multiple viewings, hopefully they get, oh crap, Ryan's character outsmarted him.
Interesting.
And so I had the opportunity to do that because they gave me the freedom in the action of the movie to create, so that I was lucky enough that nobody was pointing at me saying, oh, I want this generic action sequence. Same thing when we went into the gun battles. It was the same situation. How can I do gun stuff that's more amped up, more vicious, has more of a realistic edge to it, has more threat, but is still an entertaining gun battle, but there's an edge of realism. There's an edge of a threat that makes you sweat a little bit while you're watching the gun battle. It's not this generic thing. Even when we did the sequence that was supposed to be the flashback back in Afghanistan, there was a lot of hard thought that went into that. And there's a couple of Easter eggs, I'll tell you. Lights Out with Frank Grillo, there's some fun pieces in there that I did for the fans, because Scott's in that too. And there's some really good things that we did with that. And I had a great time working with Frank Grillo. He's a consummate professional, and that guy could fight.
Yeah.
Let me tell you, I wouldn't want to box Frank Grillo. He hits like a fucking freight train, and the guy trains all the time. Besides Scott, I haven't seen anybody train the way Frank Grillo trains. And it comes across in the movie, and again, it was a great opportunity to have people that are super talented and to be on the same page, because, again, Greg Fitzpatrick is Frank Grillo's double, and he's a brilliant stunt guy, and Frank and Greg are like this. And I had the opportunity to work with both of them to powwow with them about the fight choreography. On that film, I didn't just go away and make it up. I sat there with Greg, and we had input from Frank, and we put things together, and it was about rhythms and combinations. And when the time came, I said, well, Frank, we've got you throwing this here, but it's a 3-punch combo. If you want to throw something else. And a couple of times he did. A couple of times, you know what? I'd rather throw this. And we were like, dude, that's brilliant. It looks awesome. So again, that collaboration, I think people are going to be really surprised and excited about seeing Frank play this character and the fights in the movie having a real edge, because it's all Frank. It's all Frank. I had 3 cameras, and one of those cameras stays on Frank the entire time. And I think Greg, unfortunately on that movie, I think Greg only got to do like 3 things for Frank. And he did a brilliant job, and what he was doing was dangerous, and it had to be Greg, and it couldn't be Frank. But it was a great collaboration between ideas and talent, where there wasn't any ego involved, man. It was about creating the art, and we were all on the same page in terms of what do we want these fights to look like? How do we want them to feel? And we were all on the same page. We said, dude, it's got to feel like you. It can't feel like Hollywood. We were all in agreement. So Frank, I got to feel like it's you fighting, you doing your boxing thing. It's got to be you. I don't want any element of this to feel like choreography or some fantastical shit that you would never do. Let's just make it real. Let's just make it you whooping people's ass and have it feel real, and it'll be real to the audience because you're doing it all. And it worked out that way.
The one, ever since I started doing this show, initially it was more about like me just talking to people in the industry, and it was kind of more like a standard approach, like, tell me about your background and, just the very basic stuff. But then as I started progressing to do the show, as time has gone by, I figured out what works for me is to delve into the person's background. But what I've come to learn along the way, and I've shared this before a million times, so if anyone's heard this again before, I apologize, but I tend to find something that I've come across someone's work that I connect with them as far as the work is concerned, like the product, the film, the music, whatever the case may be. And then if I can connect with them outside of the work, like things that they talked about, not necessarily just in terms of promotional standpoints, but just more like the personality of how they approach certain situations, and sharing some insight about something about them that either shows vulnerability or in some capacity, maybe like some sort of, I hate to say it like this, but, a humanity behind that. Like I get where they're coming from. May not agree with the approach, but I get what they're coming from. Now it makes sense why it turned out the way that it did, or whatever the case may be. So when I had first really became aware of you, as I said before, it was because of the Quarter Crew videos where you had shared your insight about the history, with the swords and the times and where they were used and how they were used and so on and so forth, and then sharing some insight about your work with Scott on the films, including with Jesse as well too, and some little tidbits here and there. Like the one thing that was improvised, I think, is Average Job, which I wanted to bring up here, but which had to do with the fact that Scott's character in the movie cuts out Marcus the Worst character's liver and starts chomping on it. That was like an on the spot type of thing. Like little insight like that, like it helped me understand the whole process of like, so that those little pivotal character moments it was more spontaneous, but for me to hear that from somebody and having to share that, because it honestly made me appreciate the film a lot more, as again, as cliche as it may sound. But then when I heard you talk along the way, I started to come to realize that the same way that you approach when it came to your choreography, which I've kind of, now that I've became more aware of you, I've picked up on certain tidbits here and there that I can see Luke's DNA all over this here. Just listening to the way you talk, how you conduct yourself, and I can see the same approach that you have when it came to more or less your choreography. A lot of things you point out here too, I can honestly say when it came to how you say, let's make it more realistic. That's the vibe that I'm more or less getting off of you. That, when I listen to Scott talk and I listen to how he's very protective about his image, which he said it on more than one occasion. He wants to be more or less in control of what he's a part of here, unless it's one of those high budget films that maybe he may not have that same type of impact like he would on some of the other projects he works on in that capacity here. So there's always something that I can take away from a person's work. In this case, like Jesse's films, I can tell right away when it comes to storytelling, he's a master at that. When it comes to Scott's film, he's gotten better with his acting, but he's also gotten better with the storytelling when it comes with the action in the acting. And then, when I watch a movie that, in this case, like you worked with Chad Law, who was Section 8, I believe he also did Lights Out as well, too, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct as well? Yeah. So there's certain characteristics about certain people's work that I pick up on that they've done that I know, okay, this is someone said work. So I'm kind of going elongated here, but essentially what I've come to connect with you is that I have learned to respect the process that you have done to prepare for the work that's involved in the projects that you're working on here. And then when you start to talk about the ideas that come with it and how you go about in coordinating with everybody about how certain ideas that they may have had before didn't necessarily work out as well as you think they will, and then you find a way to be able to more or less improve on those said sequences there. And then when I think about certain things you've said along the way, including the one with David versus Goliath, or Goliath versus David, however I think is how you said it before as well. I'm really curious to see how that turned out for me to see that with this by the way you described it here for me, because having heard that, it actually builds up the anticipation for me to see how you've been able to come up with all the lead up to that and how it all comes out at the end of the day when it comes to the final cut of the film. So I am honestly a genuine fan of you as a stunt coordinator, as a fight choreographer, but really as a person as well too. Because one of the things I think I've come to appreciate a lot more about you, and I actually wanted to give you your flowers on this, is because I love your bluntness. For anyone who doesn't follow you on social media, I think they should, because I love the fact that you point out certain things that you may not necessarily agree with when it comes to certain things that have been handled when it comes to certain films, and that's in a lot of ways kind of as a breath of fresh air, because what I'm getting from your perspective is that there is I always pick up that there's a reason for that, and if you're saying something on it, it's because there's something important that I think you want people to be aware of as far as what it is that you may not be agreement with when it comes to whatever changes that may occur along the way for whatever the product is that you're commentating on. So I love the bluntness. I also love the fact that you work with a lot of other people who are very blunt about the whole process as well too. And I think it's one of the reasons why you guys work so well together when it comes to how you guys carry yourself and how you guys mesh with each other. And then that also showcases in the final cut as well too. So, I mean, I'm going long-winded here, but that's me giving you your flowers, because I think with what you've been able to pull off here from what I've seen so far up to this point, the work speaks for itself. And hearing you share these stories, in a lot of ways, I think you're also a storyteller as well too. I'm honestly kind of surprised you have not yet really considered. I'm not sure if you may have maybe one somewhere along the line, but you have yet to direct a full film on your own, because I think you have the ability to do that. Because the way you're telling these stories that leads to one thing to the other and then to the other. I think you're more than capable of telling a fascinating story, whether it be an action film or whatever type of genre you may want to take on. I think you have the chops to be able to pull it off here. So, I know you kind of talked before about some upcoming projects you worked on here with Jean-Claude Van Damme, and you also mentioned about Lights Out that's going to be supposed to be coming out next year. But I was hoping if you can either share more insight about that or any other coming projects that you're able to share here as far as what people can look out for in the near future, because after this conversation, I'm a much bigger fan of you now, because there's more about your personality that I've been able to gather from here that I'm absolutely fascinated with here, that I can see in looking back at all the stuff you've done here so far that you've touched upon here, that made me respect your work that much more hearing these stories. Because I think one of the biggest things that people must understand is that it's not just the actor story that we're hearing that goes to the production and directors and the writers, but it's also the other people as well too, stunt coordinators, obviously the producers, as who else I can think of here, the guys who are working the technical side of it as well too, CGI, all that stuff, all those little important details that make the film turn out as well as they do, or maybe if they didn't turn out as well, but if we can hear the stories why they didn't turn out as well, we have a better understanding of the process to understand that maybe it's not entirely their fault, but there's a reason why it didn't turn out as well, to give them the benefit of the doubt and hear their side of the story here. So I'm hoping this more or less will be an educational process for people to understand what it takes to make film, but hearing it from other perspective rather than the most common one, which is the actors and the directors, which is what most people tend to think of when it comes to the filmmaking process here. So I give the floor back to you here too, if you want to share anything else to add on to that.
I appreciate everything you said, because you're very insightful in terms of, there are a lot of things, because I watch your YouTube channel, and something that I want you to know is you catch on to a lot of things, and we appreciate that so much. When you've said a number of times, you've gone, I kind of think they were going for this here, and I'm watching you going, oh my God, he gets it, he totally nailed it. We didn't do that for no reason, because he got it, he picked up on it, and he was intuitive enough to see where we were going with things artistically, creatively, and that means a lot to us. So for me, and it's the same thing, because you talked about my bluntness. I try very hard to reiterate when I'm on social media and I am blunt about things. I try to bring it from a creative point of view, in terms of when I'm blunt, I'm saying, you know what, there was a real opportunity here. And in a lot of cases, I feel like you didn't go back and do that extra rewrite, or you didn't go back and look at what you were doing and say, you know what, this isn't good enough, and throw it out and start over. Because that's another part of the creative process that's hard, is I'll constantly judge my own work. I'll look, and if I'm going in the wrong direction, I'll look at it and go, no, that's crap. Get rid of that. When I did the lightsaber choreography for Corridor, they were whole pieces that I cut out and re-choreographed, because I just went, that's not right. That's not the right feel. It's not telling the right story point. It's crap, and I've got to make it better. I've got to fix it. I've got to push on myself. And the Corridor guys have always been very, very generous with me, and I've got a great working relationship with them. Nico and I are really pretty close. I'm close with Nico and Sam, but Nico and I seem to think a lot more alike, and those guys are so busy. I mean, I got to see Sam, like last week, I saw Sam and Nico because I did an episode. There's a new episode coming out that I did for them for Punch for Punch. And it's about Blood Origin, the new Witcher show on Netflix.
Oh yeah.
And again, it's a breakdown of a different aspect, because you know how I'm always Mr. Realism, and I'm always, well, in this instance, it's different, because in this instance, I'm validating fantasy choreography. In this episode, I talk about other worlds and how you need to be creative, and how, as long as somebody is doing a great job with having a backstory and a validity to why they're doing something, a fantasy storyline needs fantasy swordplay. You can do something really, really realistic, but if you only use historical sword techniques, and these are supposed to be ancient elves who are in every way more developed than human beings. They're stronger, they're faster, they've got different fighting techniques, they're hundreds of years old. You've got to incorporate all of that in. So again, another opportunity was given to me where I was able to come from an entirely different angle, because part of me is always wanting to go back to, okay, guys, I know I'm really opinionated. I know I bark. I know I'm blunt, but I'm not an unreasonable human being. I'm not this mean jackass. I can see both sides of any story, and I understand the creative process in terms of needing to do things outside the box. So even in all my bluntness in videos and on social media and everything, I always try to make it clear that I'm still talking about pushing the creative process forward. I'm still a fan of everybody. I'm still rooting. Even if I tear a movie apart, I'm still rooting for those filmmakers to do more, to push the envelope on the next project, and to, with the things that I'm noticing, when I notice things or when I disagree with something, I always try to explain why and what the process is and how and where things could have been different. I don't ever catch myself just going rah, 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 and having a bitch fest and not explaining anything, because that doesn't serve any purpose. And I don't want to be that guy. I mean, I know that, in a lot of instances with me, people joke about it, but I always kind of want to try to explain where I'm coming from, whether it's a theory or educational or creatively pushing the envelope. I always want to be able to try and explain my thought process and where I'm coming from, and never just be brutal and blunt for no reason, because that's never my intent. My intent is always to, could this have been better? Could more have been done? Why wasn't this thought of? How come the extra time wasn't taken here? I'm always trying to look at the entire picture. And I'm always going to do that. I mean, I'm a critical person. I'm very self-critical. I push on myself all the time. And so, I'm going to do that all the way across the boards creatively, because I really feel like it's up to us, because the general public is looking to us to be entertained. The general public is looking to us to be educated and to have new doors opened and new insights. So I really appreciate and I thank you for the comments that you made, because it tells me that I'm doing something right. It tells me that I'm imparting thought or information or showing something in a new light, so that if it sparks questions and it makes you appreciate things more, I feel good, because I feel like what I'm trying to do is coming across. And so let me do one thing here and try and do this, because I'm slowly descending into darkness, because I'm outdoors and it's now, 5 o'clock, and at 5 o'clock it gets pitch black. So anyway, in what I was trying to say, to sum up, I'm always trying to come from a perspective of making things better, paying attention to the creative process, educating people so that they appreciate what they're seeing more. I always want everybody to get the most that they can get out of everything. Like there are a number of things that I just watched, and luckily I've seen a handful of projects in the last couple of days that I loved, that creatively moved me, that got me all caught up in the story, and gave me new faith that in the midst of all of this kind of, where you have streaming kind of cookie cutting movies that are just assembled, and you look at it and you say, well, it's a good movie, but I don't feel any way about it.
Yeah.
Was it good? Yeah, it was entertaining. Yeah, it was all there. Yeah, it had a beginning, middle, and end, and I watched it, but you don't feel any real way about it. You're not jumping up and down saying you want to watch it 3 times. You're not calling your friends and saying, oh my God, this is the most creatively brilliant thing I've ever seen. So I'm always looking for that film or that project that makes critical me feel like an 8-year-old again and jump up and down in my seat, like when I was 10 and I first saw Star Wars and the first stormtrooper came through the wall and I lost my mind. When the wall exploded and the stormtrooper came through and then Darth Vader came through after it, that was it, man. I was hooked. They had me 200%, because that was something that was entirely new. And so I'm always looking, it doesn't matter what kind of project it is, I'm always looking for somebody to bring out that 8-year-old in me. And I'm really happy that, in the last sort of week, I've seen a number of projects where I finished watching it really excited about it, going, oh my God, they got me, they hooked me. They brought a tear to my eye. They made me want to watch it again. They made me want to call my friends and go, dude, you got to watch this. It's amazing. So, again, that's also something that personally I try to strive for, in that I do have, I've got goals and rules that I set for myself, in that I will almost never compromise. In every film that I've ever worked on and any action piece that I've ever done, it might have been a hokey low budget movie, but I really feel that I can stand behind all my work, in that everything that I've ever done, when somebody looks at it, they can go, well, the action was well done. It looked safe. It told a story. I may not love this whole movie, but I like the action sequences, so that I can stand behind my work. And so that when I get, and I get crap from stunt guys and stunt people who work for me, and they're like, dude, why are you taking this so seriously? Why are you getting so stressed out? Why are you? I'm like, because it's my name that goes up on the screen, and it's my work. And if my work is going to be judged, I want to make sure I'm putting my best foot forward and using every brain cell I have to try and make something that, regardless of how the final product of the movie turns out, they're not going to tear me to pieces and say they were disappointed. And I try and do all my work that way. So I'm always thinking of the viewer whenever I do anything I do. I'm never doing it out of my own ego. I'm always trying to think, I want whoever's watching this to appreciate everything I've done here and come away from it saying, I really enjoyed that.
On that note, I think that's a good way to close out with this here, because I think with what you just said really sums up with how I feel about your work, because it's exactly what I always feel like walking away with whenever I watch anything that you are involved with here. So for the camera, I want to say thank you again, because this was, something we've been working on for quite some time to finally to get happening. So the fact that we're actually doing this here was well worth the wait, in my opinion, because I feel like if I, from what I've been able to hear from you in the past and what you've been able to share, I always feel like that's just the tip of the iceberg. And I even think, even now with this conversation, I mean, we barely just scratched the surface here about what else you have more insight on that could be really insightful to help educate a lot of people in the as far as the industry is concerned, but also really coming from more of like a storyteller perspective, but in the stunt world, if you will, in the fight choreography world, if you will. I think that's really important to tell. And like I said before, I think you're a director just waiting to happen. And I hope one day that you do take that challenge and make a film, because if you do, I would be the first in line to watch that movie, because I think you have something really incredible to tell. And whatever stories you decide to take on it, I think it's going to be well worth the time, especially if you're willing to give 100% on it as well. So this is me giving you your flowers and me saying thank you.
Just an inside tidbit for you. I am in talks to direct a film.
And I hope it does happen.
It's very early on, and there's a creative process going on in terms of what that's going to be. And I'm looking forward to it. And, I'll make sure that you're one of the first people that know as it develops.
I would be the first in line to see it, man. I cannot wait. I have the utmost confidence that it probably will happen. I know the industry, how it is, but seeing your work and seeing what the people have been able to see throughout the years, I think it speaks for itself. So I'm pretty confident saying that they'll probably trust your take on it, and therefore the project will end up going forward here. So I can't wait to see it when it comes to fruition, man. So for the cameras, I want to say thank you again, and cheers to you, good sir.
Thank you, Rob. I really appreciate it, and I had a great time.